Welcome to Reversing Hashimoto Show. I'm your show host, Dr. Anshul Gupta, the world expert in Hashimoto's disease. I help people reverse their thyroid conditions by making personalized functional medicine plans. You can work with me with any part of the country now by making virtual functional medicine appointments. To book an appointment, look at the show notes. In this show, I am going to get experts from all over the world who are going to share latest information that will help you to reclaim your life back from dreadful thyroid disease. So welcome here. And we have today with us wonderful Cynthia Thurlow. Welcome over here.
Thank you for having me. I've been excited to connect with you.
Oh, absolutely. I'm really excited to talk about, our topic about intermittent fasting with thyroid patients. And I'm really excited to kind of go into the details about it, whether it is good, whether it's bad, and what are the ways to do it. But let me first introduce you before we go into the details of it. So Cynthia Thurlow is a nurse practitioner, CEO and founder of the Everyday Wellness Project, an international speaker with over 9.6 million views for her second TEDx talk, Intermittent Fasting, Transformational Technique. With over 20 years experience in health and wellness, Cynthia is a globally recognized expert in intermittent fasting and nutritional health and has been featured on ABC, Fox 5, KTLA, CW, Medium, Entrepreneur, and the Megyn Kelly Show. Cynthia developed her intermittent fasting plan after entering her 40s and experiencing a health breakdown. Intermittent fasting didn't just help her lose weight, she had more energy, fewer cravings, and lower blood glucose levels. She has now worked with thousands of women in her private practice to make her unique program of intermittent fasting work for them too. Her upcoming book, Intermittent Fasting Transformation, which is already out, offers a customizable nutrition guide to feeling you best at every stage of life through hormone balancing, lifting brain fog, weight loss, detoxification, and much more. Welcome, Cynthia, over here.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to chatting with you about some of my favorite topics.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. But before we delved into intermittent fasting, I just came to know that you also struggle with thyroid issues in your life. So if you don't mind sharing your struggles with thyroid and how you could get them better, that will be great for audience.
Yeah, I think it's really relevant for, listeners and viewers to understand that I myself have dealt and still deal with thyroid issues now. Gosh, probably 8 or 9 years ago, my wonderful functionally medicine trained provider said, I think you're in a position, you're in perimenopause, the 5 to 10 years preceding menopause, and you're exhausted and you're gaining weight and your thyroid looks like it needs some support. And I initially was really reticent to go on medication. So I, for 6 months, fought her. And I would encourage anyone that's watching this, if your healthcare professional is determined you're in a position where you need medication, please don't argue with them. I spent 6 months just in a fog and just exhausted. And so I recall as soon as I was placed on Nature Thyroid, it's almost as if a light bulb went on in my brain. I had so much more energy. I felt so much better. And I think it's important for people to understand that, our thyroid, day to day, month to month may require adjustments. I got very dialed in on, the lifestyle piece. And to me, it was really surprising and actually quite humbling as a healthcare professional myself, that if I had not been working with someone that was willing to do a full comprehensive thyroid panel of labs, we might very well have missed, because my TSH is never abnormal. It's really more my free and total T4 and T3 and my reverse T3 that were off significantly. And to me, it was just incredibly humbling to realize that it's okay to take medication. It's certainly okay to take medication if you need to do that just to feel like you can function. And one other really important thing that I've learned is that I always assumed I didn't have Hashimoto's because my thyroid my thyroid antibodies were always negative. What I've come to find out over the last several years is that because I've been gluten-free for more than 10 years, that is probably the likelihood of why my antibodies have been negative. And it's not actually that I have non-autoimmune, hypothyroidism. I actually have Hashimoto's, and most people that have Hashimoto's or have other autoimmune disorders are actually more susceptible to more than one. And so at that point, when I came to that realization, it was very humbling. But I'm now very stable on medication. I sleep well. My weight is stable. I don't have the degree of mental fog and lack of brain clarity that I was really struggling with. And so I hope that gives everyone some appreciation when I talk about fasting and fasting strategies, that I really do speak from personal and professional experience, that it's not just patients, that I myself still to this day take thyroid medication.
Wow, that's a story that people like to listen to, and definitely a lot of good points that were made over there. Because as a functional medicine provider, a lot of people come to see me and they talk about medications. They think that I hate medications, but you brought an important point that not all medications are bad. So it's just not about the medications; it's about what else you can do to optimize your health along with medications that we need to talk about.
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of people, there's so much confusion. I know that when I worked in cardiology, it seemed like almost every woman in their 40s was struggling with the same things I started struggling with: weight gain, trouble sleeping, lack of energy, developing food sensitivities. And so I think I look at it as a personal, public service announcement, that I want women to not be fearful, in particular about addressing thyroid health with medication, because to me, there was, I did all the thyroid glandulars, I did the minerals that to make proper thyroid hormone. It did nothing for me. It's not to suggest it might not work for someone else, but it was such a significant change when I started medication that I thought to myself, I feel absolutely no shame over the fact that I have to take medication to support my thyroid. My thyroid has guided me well into my early 40s, and now it just needs a little bit of support to work optimally.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about this fasting and how that can be another tool in people's toolbox of improving their thyroid disorder. But first, let's kind of, clear the terminologies about fasting, because in the modern world, we have so many different terms like intermittent fasting, then, longer fasts, and then water fasting. So tell us, what are the differences about these different kind of fasting techniques?
Yeah, it's an important distinction. And so when I'm talking about intermittent fasting, I'm usually speaking to a specific time frame during the day in which you are fasted versus fed. And so probably the most common intermittent fasting schedule is a 16-8, which means 16 hours fasted with an 8-hour feeding window. And that is something that most people work their way up to. Now, some people that intermittent fast, they may do a 24, which means they do 20 hours fasted with a 4-hour eating window. There are others that do just a period of digestive rest, 12 hours fasted with a 12-hour feeding window. The beautiful thing about intermittent fasting is that it's flexible based on your needs, where you are, if you're a woman in your menstrual cycle, or where you are in perimenopause or menopause. And men and menopausal women, they don't have as much hormonal flux, and so they get a whole lot more flexibility. Then we move on to extended fast. And an extended fast to me is anything that you do for more than 24 hours. I like people to be very deliberate. What is their intention they're setting for a longer fast? I do find for people that are insulin resistant, leptin resistant, obese, overweight, that sometimes doing a 24 to a 48-hour fast might be a good way to kind of reset things in their bodies. With that being said, I like people to be purposeful. I met someone recently who wanted to fast for 48 hours every week. And this is someone who's at a healthy weight. And I said, okay, well, let's be intentional about why we're doing this. One of the big aspects of longer fasting is that you're going to get more autophagy. So this waste and recycling in the process in the body. You have the ability to positively impact the epithelial lining of the small intestine, even impacting some degree stem cell reactivation. And so really being clear about what you're doing. Now, irrespective of whether you're doing an intermittent or a prolonged fast, I always recommend that patients are hydrated with electrolytes, unflavored electrolytes, understanding the concept of a clean fast, which means you're not consuming food during your fast. And also, the understanding that we don't want to do, I don't believe in doing fasting as a dry effort, meaning you're not consuming any water or hydration. We do want to keep our bodies well hydrated to help flush out toxins, to be really sensitive to the fact that our brains are very sensitive to dehydration. And I just feel like the best possibilities exist when we are in a position when we're doing fasting, whether it's a shorter duration or longer, that we stay really well hydrated, again, with electrolytes. You can have bitter coffee, bitter teas. Bitter is so it doesn't evoke an insulin response, and really understanding the differentiator between each one of those. You can, over the course of a month, do intermittent fasting every day, and then maybe have one or two longer fasts during the month. Really depends on your needs and your goals. I think that's a really important starting point, to find that distinction that intermittent fasting and prolonged fasting can exist on the continuum for every individual. Sometimes I'll give you an example. When I've been away on vacation, maybe I've eaten more food than I normally do. I might come back from vacation and do a 24-hour fast to kind of like get back on track, let my body, burn through some excess glycogen stores that I have ingested, more carbohydrates than I normally ingest, and kind of get back on track. So you have the ability, once you're fat adapted, once your body is able to be more metabolically flexible, to use fasting as a strategy to harness, all of your, your endeavors, all the things that you're focusing on, all the things that you're creating as goals.
Absolutely. I think that's a great distinction, as you said, that people need to make. So thank you for sharing that. So let's come back to the intermittent fasting kind of window, because you shared people can go all the way from 12 hours to 20 hours of fasting, and then they can still get the benefit. So what is the minimum amount of time that people have to fast to get the benefit of intermittent fasting?
It's a great question. And I think I always start from the place of, we as a society should be eating less frequently. And so there are some people who are eating from the moment they wake up and drinking sugary beverages until the moment they go to bed. In fact, there was a great study done by Sachin Panda that really was looking at meal frequency and consumption of beverages. And the average person was 6 to 10 times a day. So for people that are just starting out, that maybe you're more sedentary or more carbohydrate dependent, you're eating a highly processed, hyperpalatable diet, I would say let's aim for, you eat dinner at 6 o'clock and you don't eat till breakfast. And so even having 12 hours in between dinner and breakfast can be profoundly powerful. Now, if you look at fasting research that's out there, I know everyone always wants to know, when does autophagy really start to, upregulate? When do we get the most benefits? Well, the longer you fast, the more benefits you're going to get. It's not as if autophagy goes on and off like a light switch. It's balancing between that and something called mTOR. And so I remind people that the longer you fast, the more autophagy, but we can't measure it. It's impossible to measure it. So a lot of this is based on, research and conjecture. So I usually aim for people to do a minimum of 16 hours. 18 hours, you're going to get more. If you get to 20, you're going to have more autophagy. But I don't ever want anyone to feel like because they only fasted for 15 hours, there were no benefits. We know that even 13, 14, 15 hours, you're going to get better insulin sensitivity and blood sugar regulation. You're going to have more mental clarity. Once you become fat adapted, you're going to have significant energy changes. And so a lot of this always goes back to the health of the mitochondria, and certainly in thyroid patients, the health of the mitochondria more often than not is dysfunctional. We know based on research that after the age of 40, unfortunately, most of us have dysfunctional mitochondria. And so fasting is a way that we can improve conversion of inactive to active thyroid hormone, T4 to T3. And so I kind of use it, especially if someone is a thyroid patient already, kind of giving them a sense that this is a way to make their mitochondria and their cellular machinery much more efficient. And I love efficiency, which is why intermittent fasting is definitely a strategy I love to support.
Absolutely. I love mitochondria. In my book that I recently wrote on Hashimoto's, I just talk about this mitothyroid connection. I feel that mitochondria has been neglected in the thyroid patients for a long time. And we need to develop strategies to actually support it. And definitely intermittent fasting is a great strategy because, as I said, it changes so many chemical mediators and so many channels like mTOR and other genes, which kind of changes that. So definitely that's a good thing for a lot of thyroid patients.
Absolutely. And I think for so many of us, by the time we get to be 40, we just don't realize like our bodies, it's almost like a car, your tires are wearing out, you got to replace the tires. It's important to understand that fasting is beyond just changing body composition or weight loss. It really is about optimizing our cellular machinery so that we can work as efficiently as possible. So it's not just getting rid of diseased organelles and mitochondria and other types of debris. It's lessening our risk of developing certain types of cancers. It is, lowering our potential for specific types of neurocognitive disorders. And I always like to remind women that until we go through menopause, we're really protected from things like Alzheimer's. And so the more I understand about brain physiology and the interplay between different types of hormones, the more humbled I am that I didn't know quite as much, even 5 or 6 years ago. But now I look at it as fasting is something that we really should be doing on a regular basis. It might be that there are times if you're a woman in your menstrual cycle where we don't want you fasting, but for most other, adults that are grown, I'm thinking about my teenagers that are still growing. I don't like them to fast, but most men and women, and certainly when we look at statistics on metabolic ill health and the fact that we have a largely metabolically unhealthy population, it really speaks to the fact that our patients desperately need strategies that they have the ability to have some control over in their personal and professional lives, but also something that when we fully understand and appreciate what intermittent fasting is, we wouldn't be here as a species if our bodies couldn't handle the stress and the rigor of periods of food scarcity and periods where there is not a scarcity ability to connect with food. And so I would say the processed food industry in many ways, and the kind of rhetoric about eating for meal frequency and stoking your metabolism has done exactly the opposite. So there's a degree of cognitive dissonance that is embraced by not only the lay public, but also a lot of healthcare professionals. So I'm grateful that you're bringing healthcare professionals on to talk about topics that are really relevant and important.
Absolutely. So the next question, like most people have after like how many hours they need to fast, is like how many days that they can continue to fast. Because some people feel that they can fast for like forever, like each and every day, and some people like to take breaks, like say, okay, well, I fast for 5 days and take a break on the weekends. What do you feel is the best strategy?
Well, I think it really depends on the individual. I tend to be the kind of person, like I like doing things consistently. That actually is easier for me to adapt into my lifestyle. But I have many clients and patients who will say, I can fast Monday through Friday because my husband's at work, my kids are in school, but on the weekend, I want to be able to eat breakfast with my children. I want to be able to go out to dinner. And so, if you look at the research, like even 5 days a week of fasting can still be highly effective. I think the area of caution is the days where you're not fasting are not an excuse to pig out or to overeat. You're going to still eat on the same regimen, whether it's protein focused with non-starchy vegetables and carbohydrates, if you've earned them, other types of carbs, if you've earned them. It's not an all day pig out fast. I've had clients that have done that and then have gone back to really regret overeating or binging on food. So the other piece is making sure during the week, if you're taking a break, even for one day on the weekend, making sure you're getting your macronutrients, the right amount of protein, fat, and carbohydrates into your diet. Because when you do that, you won't feel the need to binge. I think that's a really, really important distinction. If people are still really restricting their food intake inside of a feeding window, you're setting yourself up for disaster.
So in the intermittent fasting, the next question most people have is that can I combine it with other diet plans like keto diets or AIP diets or paleo diets? What do you feel
Absolutely.
about it?
I do. I would say, with very few exceptions, I do think if people have quite a bit of weight to lose, that a lower carbohydrate or ketogenic diet can be hugely impactful. I've seen people combine fasting with carnivore, with AIP. I've seen people do very well if they're doing a plant-based diet that's focused on not consuming soy. But obviously, you have to be careful. It's hard to be lower carb and be plant-based or vegan. Although I'm all about eating plants, I think that's, we should be having more fiber and phytonutrient dense foods. But I think always the challenge is, can you eat lower carb when most people need to lose weight and be plant-based? It's a very delicate balance. And this is where I sometimes will get, I literally get stuck because I want to be able to honor the own unique desires of each individual. But I'll sometimes have to say, can I get you to eat some eggs? Maybe if you're vegetarian, like let's eat some eggs. So you're getting a little bit more protein into your diet. Women in particular really undereat protein. It's almost as if they're afraid of protein. And then the usual milieu for me is, whether they're male or female, too many carbohydrates, too little of the right types of fats, and too little protein. And once you flip that, people are full and satiated and so much happier. Their blood sugar is better balanced. And then they really understand, like, did that cup of rice really serve you? Or did that undermine all the other work that you have been doing? And so it's not to suggest if you tolerate grains, that can be fine. I actually worry more about the net impact of what's been done to the grains before it ends up on your plate or in your pantry. really talking about the interrelationship. And certainly with Hashimoto's being an autoimmune disorder, looking at the impact of glyphosate, exposure to pesticides and herbicides that are designed to create a healthier plant that's less likely to spoil, but ultimately really wreaks havoc on the gut microbiome.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about like all the benefits that you can think of that intermittent fasting, can like be helpful for all the Hashimoto's patients. What are all the benefits that you see?
Well, I always start with, once you become fat adapted and your body is able to flex between using glucose or fatty acids as a fuel source, you will actually break down into a certain type of ketone called beta hydroxybutyrate. So this will diffuse across the blood-brain barrier. And it's an incredible chemical that will allow you to have tremendous mental clarity, a lot more energy. Our brains love fats, healthy fats. So that's number one, mental clarity and energy. I think about the reduction in inflammation and oxidative stress in the body, really, really important. Obviously, I would be remiss if we're talking about an autoimmune disorder, really talking about the benefits to the gut microbiome, upregulation of certain types of short-chain fatty acids, talking about improvement in the epithelial lining of small intestine. And there's so many nerdy things about the gut microbiome that I'm sure other speakers have probably addressed, but I always focus on there, knowing that it improves your blood sugar profile, it improves your insulin sensitivity, it improves your lipid profile. So your triglycerides, your HDL, which are a large part of what I choose to focus on, it improves your blood pressure. If you're insulin resistant, you more than likely are more prone to high blood pressure or hypertension. I think about lowered uric acid levels. And we know this is this emerging additional marker for metabolic health. And those are just the tipping point, but we know it's also this reduction in neurocognitive disorders like Parkinson's and dementia, and then a reduction in certain types of cancers. So always with the Hashimoto's patients, I think about inflammation, oxidative stress, upregulation in autophagy, the waste and recycling process that goes on when we're in an unfed state. And that alone can be pretty powerful. I think that so many people come to intermittent fasting because they want to change body composition, they want to lose weight. Certainly thyroid patients, that is something most of us have dealt with. But what I remind people is what keeps most individuals interested in fasting is the benefits that extend beyond the physical outside. They're really focused on the reduction in bloating. All of a sudden, they're having regular bowel movements, things that are pretty tangible and seem pretty simplistic, but are really powerful.
Absolutely. Yes. That is a big laundry list of benefits that people can get from the intermittent fasting. And as you rightly pointed out, most people want to do the fasting just because they want to lose some weight. But, like they don't realize that, it has so many other benefits, anti-aging. And it's kind of, I call this as a biohacking into your body in a more natural fashion without using any supplements.
Yes. And I think for so many people, when we use the term anti-aging, or we talk about how we're a very age-focused society, I just remind people, like, chronologically, you could very easily be one age. And because you're aging in reverse, you could be 10 or 15 years younger. And it's amazing to me. I went to my high school reunion a few years ago, and I would say 50% of people looked great. The other half looked inflamed. They were telling me they were dealing with weight gain, and they were dealing with chronic joint pain, and they had diabetes. And all I could think of was the beauty of intermittent fasting is just about anyone, I say just about anyone, can do this. And I've seen miraculous improvements in people's health just with changing whatever window in which they eat their foods. And so I think on a lot of levels, this is one of many ways that we can use to hack our health in very benign ways, but very powerful ways. Obviously, fasting is not new or novel. It dates back to biblical times. And it's part of, almost all the major religions. Certainly when I was growing up, I'm Roman Catholic. And, all the high holy days, when we were kids, we didn't have to fast, but my grandparents were very fervent believers in that fasting was a way to connect spiritually. And so I think there are all these kind of untapped resources around fasting that can be very, very helpful.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about, how this is a question a lot of thyroid patients have, is that can one safely fast with thyroid issues and how they can do it?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. And I think it really begs to bioindividuality. So our N of one, each one of us, if we have thyroid issues. I know for myself, when I have not been stable on thyroid medication, meaning my healthcare professional is checking me every month or every 6 weeks, because I'm either very tired and I'm struggling with energy, and maybe the weight's up and I'm just feeling inflamed. When I'm not stable on medication, that's not the time to add more stress to the body. So let me back up and say, intermittent fasting is a type of hormesis or hormetic stress, the beneficial stress in the right amount at the right time. So if you're not stable on medication, and this is corroborated by labs, you're not stable with symptoms, like you're feeling really, really off, like you're not sleeping, you're exhausted, maybe your periods are really wonky in relationship to this as well. You don't have the energy to get through a workout. This is not the time to add more stress to your body. And I think, unfortunately, we have a culture that, we have a very toxic dieting culture, which is not our fault. This is what we have grown up within. And so women think they have to push through it. Like, I just have to push through being tired. I just have to work out harder. I just need to restrict my food more. So that's certainly an instance when I would say this is not the time to put the gas pedal all the way down. This is the time to back off. And maybe you're really working at, eating within a 12-hour digestive rest protocol, meaning you're having protein-filled breakfast, lunch, and then dinner, and then you're having digestive rest for 12 hours. Now, on the contrary, if you are stable on medication, you're sleeping well, you manage your stress, you're not over-exercising, you're eating an anti-inflammatory diet. And I'm very outspoken about the fact that with this molecular mimicry issue that occurs with thyroid patients, you should be avoiding those inflammatory foods. If you're doing all the above and you're ready to be able to utilize fasting as a strategy, it's absolutely something that you can try. And for me personally, I always suggest, if you're on medication chronically and you're working with a healthcare professional, let them know that you are contemplating this, because you may need an adjustment in your medication. I've seen plenty of thyroid patients that need less thyroid medication as they get an upregulation in their mitochondrial recycling process. Mitophagy is getting rid of the disease disordered mitochondria. And so I think it's always best practice to make sure that you're touching base. It may be that you need to change nothing, but always best. And certainly if you're on diabetes medication or also high blood pressure medicine, you absolutely want to have a conversation. But that's usually the two environments that I think of. If you're stable in medicine, feel good, great. If you're completely the opposite, it is not the time. But that does not then mean if 6 months from now, you're stable on medicine, you're feeling better, you're sleeping well, you have plenty of energy, that you can't then entertain the possibility of using fasting as a strategy, which, if you look at the research, the beautiful thing about fasting is that it's on this continuum. And it might be that maybe you start with 12 hours of digestive rest and you slowly kind of open up that fasting window to see what works for you. Also leaning into, this is an important caveat, if you are a woman that's still getting a menstrual cycle, if your thyroid is off, your menstrual cycle may be off. And so I've seen women that once they start fasting and their blood sugars better stabilize, and we made sure all the other variables are really dialed in, more often than not, their menstrual cycle will actually improve. And I like to think of a menstrual cycle as a barometer of health. So when it's not functioning optimally, it's wonky, it's too heavy, it's too light, it's a sign that you need to lean into what your body is trying to communicate. And for some women, they could go right up until menopause and have a regular menstrual cycle every month. Others, they have completely the opposite. So there is some degree of bioindividuality, but recognizing that our menstrual cycle is a really important indicator of endocrine health, and thyroid is certainly part of that as well.
Absolutely. The other thing is that, there is a big difference of doing fasting in men as compared to the women. And I think for several years, we did not know about that difference. And I think that's the reason a lot of women continue to suffer or not having results with intermittent fasting. So can you share with us, what is the difference between men and women, and how can women do intermittent fasting the right way?
Yeah. And I think it's such an important, I'm so grateful that you asked this question. What I always say is I don't like to put women into buckets. However, a woman that's 35 or under, still at peak fertile years, is very different than a woman in perimenopause, 5 to 10 years preceding menopause, or menopause, which is 12 months without a menstrual cycle. I will, for purposes of this discussion, say that menopausal women who are sleeping well, that are dialing in on stress, that are doing the right types of exercise and eating an anti-inflammatory diet, and men have a much easier time. They don't have as much hormonal flux day to day, month to month, week to week. So I'll put them off to a side. When I'm talking about cycling women, there is a time period in your menstrual cycle. And for purposes of this discussion, I'm going to give a broad overview from the day you bleed till right before ovulation. If you have a 28-day cycle, that typically encompasses the follicular phase. And this is when estrogen predominates. And estrogen is this masterful hormone that allows us to push our workouts harder. We can be lower carbohydrate. We can fast longer. Now, those 2 weeks, you have a superpower. And then after ovulation, again, this is an oversimplification, progesterone predominates. And this is the hormone that's kind of mellow. It helps us with, helps us sleep. It definitely helps with anxiety and depression. It can be a little bit bloating. But when progesterone predominates, and certainly the week before your menstrual cycle, I generally encourage women to back off of the accelerator of fasting. This is the time to do 12 hours of digestive rest. It's the time when you can have a discretionary, a little bit more carbohydrate, high quality carbs. I'm not talking about cakes and cookies and pies. That's not what I'm referring to. Squash, sweet potato, grains, if you tolerate them, maybe about 100 calories more. And that will help with the hormonal conversions that are necessary. And then as soon as you start bleeding, that's day one of your menstrual cycle and you're back to the follicular phase. One thing I forgot to mention. So estrogen is an insulin sensitizing hormone versus progesterone, which tends to be an insulin resistant hormone. And I say tends, obviously everyone's different. It's the recognition for really leaning into our physiology. So if you are under the age of 35, understanding that your brain and your ovaries are in constant communication. And so if your body senses, if you're very lean, as an example, if you're very thin, BMI under 18, you shouldn't be fasting. But if you're very lean, you should not be fasting every day because your body is exquisitely attuned and sensitive to cues in your environment. And it may perceive that if you're fasting every day and doing it for long periods, I see a lot of women doing this, some of which have eating disorders, and they hide their eating disorder in their intermittent fasting regimen. The understanding that if your body is primed to procreate, even if you are choosing not to have a child at that point, your body can let you know you are doing too much. It's too much stress, that hormesis, really understanding that if your menstrual cycle goes away, remember I said it's a barometer of our health, it's a sign it's too much stress. I mean, I interact with women almost every day, and occasionally women will say, I just can't fast because anytime I try to do it, my period goes away. And that's okay. That's what makes you you. Now, if you're under the age of 35, you have PCOS, you're obese, you have thyroid issues, etc. There are benefits to fasting. Obviously, again, understanding where you are physiologically within your cycle and leaning into that. Don't apologize for the fact you get a menstrual cycle. It's what makes us unique. And then we have perimenopause. And so for a lot of women, late 30s, early 40s, you're there. I have women that want to argue about this. I'm like, physiologically, you're going through reverse puberty. That's what perimenopause is. Our ovaries are making less progesterone. Progesterone is, again, that hormone that helps with sleep and anxiety reduction and, being antidepressive. When you start losing that, all of a sudden, you may not sleep as well. You may be more anxious. You may get put on an antidepressant. In relationship to estrogen, you now have more estrogen circulating than progesterone. You may get heavier periods. You may gain weight. You may have breast tenderness. And so understanding what's going on physiologically with your body is critically important. The other thing about perimenopause and menopause is this is when you have to get enough sleep. They're gone are the days that you can get by with 2 or 3 hours of sleep, like a college co-ed. Those days are gone. You have to be doing the right types of exercise. And that means strength training and walking are going to be your friends. Doing CrossFit 5 days a week is going to throw your body into a little bit of a hailstorm. Anti-inflammatory nutrition. I'm a huge proponent of thyroid patients not consuming gluten and dairy. Questionably soy, adding that in as well, because that's the issue with molecular mimicry. And then really thinking about stress management. And that is not 5 minutes of meditation once a day. That is thinking about stress management throughout their day. It could be as simple as getting an oxytocin, which is one of these, key hormones. Oxytocin hit by hugging your husband or significant other or your dog or your kid or doing something that brings you joy. But oxytocin only hangs around for a little while. So you have to get oxytocin hits throughout the day, meditation, connecting with nature, all of which are beneficial. But I remind my women in middle age, this is not just, telling me you did 5 minutes of meditation. It is a general stress management practice. And then if you're adding in intermittent fasting and you've dialed in on those 4 other areas, should be able to fast effectively, again, leaning into where you are in your cycle. Now, ironically enough, the past week, I think we've gotten about 15 questions about women that have IUDs, so intrauterine devices, and they don't get cycles. A couple things you can do. Number one, ask your healthcare professional to draw an FSH, a follicular stimulating hormone. That can at least let you know, where are you? If your FSH is greater than 40 on at least 2 occasions, you are probably closer to menopause than you realize. Number 2, you can certainly, I wear an Oura ring. My Oura ring tells me what my temperature is day to day. Sometimes you will get a rise around the time of ovulation, so you can trend that way. Or a third way that you can kind of get a sense for where you are in your cycle is to follow the lunar calendar. And so day one would be the day of the full moon. You can seed cycle. Obviously, this is kind of a gray area, and I find that most women will lean one direction or another, but perimenopause can be a wild ride, but it is not a contraindication to fasting.
Awesome. I think that was very in-depth, differences between the women and how complex women physiology is, like now I guess we all understand it. So what are the common mistakes that you will say that people do with intermittent fasting that you would like to share with them, and like what they should not be doing?
Yeah, I would say number one is that a lot of people don't clean fast. And what that means is I am a proponent for women and men, for that matter, to understand what a clean fast is. That means while you're in a fasted state, you drink water with unflavored electrolytes, you drink bitter tea. Bitter means bitter. There's lots of polyphenols in plain black coffee and bitter tea that are designed they can boost fat oxidation, but they can also upregulate autophagy. And it's important for people to understand that bitter is not going to evoke an insulin response. When you evoke an insulin response, you stop that. That's automatically you've broken your fast. So clean fasting, and there are people that want to consume fatty coffees. And I get it. If you are someone that is going from being a standard American diet couch potato to fasting, it's scary. Put those training wheels on, but with the understanding that fatty coffee could be 300 or 400 calories. And that alone could put you at risk for, if you're trying to lose weight, put you at risk for plateauing or not being able to lose weight. So if you absolutely positively have to put something fat in your coffee, MCT oil is going to be a better option. It is a certain type of caprylic acid. It is metabolized directly through the liver. It's metabolized very differently. I hate to tell you, but butter is insulinemic, so that will evoke an insulin response. Ghee is clarified butter. And I just kind of go back to what I was saying. Don't put cream in your coffee, or at least if you're doing it, understand you are running the risk of breaking your fast. Cream is also insulinemic. Dairy is insulinemic. And sometimes it can be a potent insulin inducing addition to your coffee. So number one is the clean fast. Number two, a lot of people fast and they're exhausted. They push it. They don't sleep enough. They don't understand the complex interplay with their endocrinology system and the hormones. And that, as one example, if you get less than 6 hours a night of sleep, you're going to struggle to balance leptin and ghrelin and your blood sugar and insulin and cortisol. And I mean, it's this domino effect. So people don't sleep enough. They're not resting. If you're still doing really intense exercise, there's always women that are doing 5 days a week of CrossFit. My question is always why? There's nothing wrong with wanting to do 1 or 2 tough workouts a week. But if you're in perimenopause or menopause, you need to be doing more walking, more strength training. You're going to get more bang for your buck that way. I would say another common mistake that I see people eating is they're breaking their fast with like a big bowl of fruit. And I remind people, my methodology is always this: it's protein and carbs or protein and fat. It is never carbs by themselves, and certainly not a massive fructose load. And when you think about the fact that most, if not all of us, are not metabolically healthy, fruit is not necessarily a bad thing. But if you have a blood sugar problem, you have your insulin resistant, leptin resistant, fruit is not something you should be eating all day long. I had a conversation with a diabetic about this. They were having 6 bananas a day. And I was like, you have a blood sugar problem and you're not insulin sensitive and you're eating all this fructose. And so, yes, a piece of fruit is better than having a soda, but still, understanding what to break your fast with, whether it's bone broth, whether it's a high quality protein shake. Never, never, never carbohydrates by themselves. And don't pair carbs and fat together, because that's a slippery slope. I always think about people want to have corn chips and avocado. And I'm like, avocado by itself is fine. Guacamole with a bunch of chips is going to set you up for a lot of problems. So just really understanding that those are the kinds of best practices. Those are the most common things I see people doing. I would say the other thing is comparisonitis, that more often than not, the best friend, the husband, the whomever, effortlessly lost weight, and they can't understand why that's not happening for them. And so the comparison game can be really destructive. And so I remind people that, give yourself grace, give it time. Many, many women need more than 2 or 3 weeks to start seeing changes on the scale. In fact, put the scale away, stop getting on the scale every single day. I think that's another part of the toxic diet culture, and give yourself grace. I can tell you, before I ever saw any changes on the scale, I saw a lot of the other benefits. Like all of a sudden I had so much energy and sleeping better. And so let's not make our weight the focus of how we determine if fasting is working for us, because there's so much more to it than that.
Absolutely. I think those are like great tips and a lot of motivation for a lot of folks because again, a lot of females that have this thought in their mind until they are going to lose weight, they're not going to feel better. And I also feel the opposite that, yes, you're going to feel better, then you're going to lose weight. And that happens in a lot of females. So those are great tips. Thank you for sharing those. I think we are running out of time and we can keep going with all the immense knowledge that you have. But before we let you go, please tell our folks where they can find you.
Thank you. Well, I have a new book that just came out called Intermittent Fasting Transformation, IF 45, that is available in Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, or your local bookstore. And please go to the local bookstore if you're able to do so, so that we can patronize our bookstores. www.cynthiathurlow.com is my website, which will take you to my podcast called Everyday Wellness. I'm on social media. Be forewarned, on Twitter, I can be a little snarky, but I'm very active on Instagram. And I have a free Facebook group called Intermittent Fasting Lifestyle / my name. And that's a free group that I, offer up, helpful information to allow people to get started.
Awesome. Yes, you have tons of resources and I will encourage everybody to go check those out, especially the book. I was just sharing with her that, that is a go-to book for me to share for people who want to do intermittent fasting. So please go and check it out and you'll be very, very happy about it.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure connecting with you.
Same here. Again, thank you so much for, coming over here and sharing